Welcome, everyone, to this episode of This Week in Intelligent Investing. Great to have you with us, and pleasure to welcome my co-hosts, Elliot Turner and Phil Ordway. I know we've been away for a little while. Wanted to take this opportunity to provide some context around the podcast itself, and to share some thoughts going forward. So, Phil, over to you to fill us in a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, John. So, yeah, as you mentioned, this has mostly been my fault. We've all three been busy, but we got together in middle of December now, which was already somehow like 6 or 7 weeks ago. Now that we're into February, and that was just a fantastic event. It was great to see you guys in person, which I don't get to do enough these days. I had a great conversation with all the panelists there. I certainly enjoyed my conversation with Michael Mobus, and I've been thinking about that quite a bit since it happened. So, but as I shared with you guys back then in November and December, concurrent with the end of the year, I changed some things and took on some new roles and just have a schedule that doesn't really allow me to do the regular Thursday time slot where we've always been recording in the past. And I, in conjunction with making those changes, was just trying to reevaluate, all of the commitments I had and feeling really stretched too thin in a lot of areas. So it was hard to believe when I stopped and thought about it that it had been 3.5 years of doing the podcast, right? So when John came up with this idea, I guess it was spring or early summer of 2020, right? We're all sitting around at home with the COVID pandemic going on. And when you come up with an idea, John, I usually am excited about it. And this was certainly no exception. So have been thrilled to be a part of this. Have really enjoyed it with you guys. I hope to not go completely away. I hope to be able to chime in and join you guys from time to time if there's something topical or a guest or you need a fill in or whatever. I just wanted to give you guys the courtesy of being able to go forward in a way that's a little more reliable and dependable, given what I've got going on. So, that's really it from my end. I really have loved every second of this. I didn't even know Elliot very well before we started this, or hardly at all. And so it's been awesome getting to know you, Elliot. And I've learned a ton from doing this. I mean, part of the appeal when John came to me was I thought in the back of my mind, like, all right, well, I don't know what I'm really going to get out of this, but I guess the worst case scenario will be that I'll get to spend some time every week, like preparing my thoughts and, coming up with something halfway coherent to say, hopefully, and then hearing what you guys have to say. And that has been an unbelievable investment and a return to me, that like things that I have learned from going through this and talking with you guys and the guests we've had on and everything. It's just been awesome. I've loved every second of it. So I'm a little apprehensive about not doing it anymore, and hopefully won't having too much FOMO when you guys soldier on without me. But I just want to say thank you to both of you guys. It's been awesome.
Phil, thank you, man. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you through this podcast, having our weekly and then bi-weekly appointment. Like you pointed out, starting this in the kind of summer of COVID, it really became something I looked forward to. And I similarly didn't know what I'd get out of it, but our friendship and what I've learned from you along the way. And, John, obviously doing this together, I mean, it's been a great way to make sure that we have some special time and get to know one another better. I wish some of our banter pre-recording some of these sessions would have been accessible on the podcast because there's been some real gold through that all. I think it's been, I think both fun and educational. There are not many things that you could do that kind of click on all cylinders in that way. And I think it's put us in touch with some really fantastic people out there. Phil, you've pulled some awesome interviews for the podcast. I think those have been some real special moments. Although I think one of the interesting things that I've learned about this is somehow all of you folks out there would rather listen to the three of us than even some of these phenomenal guests that we've gotten.
I know. Yeah. I think the same thing.
Yeah, so I feel privileged for that. And I think it's something to do with, like, we've really had an awesome chemistry doing this that everyone's found enjoyable in an interesting way. So, that's hard to just create, especially, I mean, we didn't meet in person until Lattice Work in 2022. So we'd done this for almost 2 years before we'd
Right.
ever like seen each other face to face.
Well, yeah, I'd met John, but I hadn't seen John in person since well before COVID, and we certainly hadn't recorded or done any of these. It's funny you mentioned that too, because I listened to this golf podcast where one guy is an Australian, he lives in the US, one guy's a American living in New Jersey, the other guy lives in the UK, and they literally have been doing this for years and had never met in person until like 2 weeks ago. It's hilarious how this kind of thing can work out, but it certainly did. And one of the things that blew me away at Lattice Work, I'm sure you guys heard the same, and it's happened a few other times in Omaha and elsewhere, but the number of people who seemed like genuinely appreciative, like we'd done them a favor. I mean, or maybe that's overstating a little bit, but they came up to say thank you and say that they really enjoyed the podcast. And I've always been worried, like, do I really have anything useful to say? Is this, worth people's time? But the response we got and the number of downloads we got, I thought was always like way ahead of my expectations. So thank you to everybody who's shared that with us, and I really appreciate it.
So on that number of downloads, I just want to ask you guys all if you had any guesses of what our 3 most listened to episodes have been.
I mean, I know what you mentioned earlier, which is that I thought that some of the interviews we had were really cool and that they like significantly trailed the weekly average when it was just the 3 of us with a normal topic. So I guess none of the top 3 would be an interview. Is that safe to say?
Safe to say. You got it.
Yeah, I can't even begin to guess. I have not gone back and looked at any of that. I can't even begin to guess what the most popular ones were.
So I'm gonna chime in with just one guess, and I think the episode on you know emerging manager advice or something like we did something along those lines, didn't we? Maybe that made it into the top
So we
3.
did that one. It was fantastic. It was not a top 3, and it was one that I wrote down when I was reflecting on like what were some of the most important episodes to me, and what were some of the ones that I know because I've heard from you all had greatest resonance with people out there. But it was not top 3. It was fairly close, but that wasn't one of them.
Interesting. Was it anything around small caps or small caps lagging performance? That seemed to get people pretty riled up.
No,
No,
I thought it would be too, and I loved those. Those are some of my favorite episodes we've
yeah, we
done,
did
and
that.
early wrong on some of those. I mean, maybe because it keeps getting worse for small caps.
It is kind of wild. Yeah, it is. I mean, I had this conversation with somebody the other day. Like, we could have had this conversation at any point. Like, frankly, having started this podcast 3.5, almost 4 years ago, seems like a long time ago in a lot of ways. Like, the world has been crazy. We've had that conversation as a podcast too, as to just how much crazy anomalous stuff has been happening the past few years. So I feel like I've been aging in dog years, but we could have had this small caps lagging conversation at various points over the past many number of years.
Exactly. It feels like Groundhog Day in that sense.
It does, yeah.
Rather than leave you all guessing, I'll hit you with our 3 most listened, and I think it's kind of interesting. The first was David Einhorn on Will Value Investing Ever Come Back? That was our
Really?
most listened to episode of them all.
Wow. Did you see what he said today, speaking of, or recently on a different podcast? He basically said markets are fundamentally broken because passive has made nobody care about valuation of any kind. So he's doubling and tripling down on that exact topic.
Yeah, passive and quants are screwing it all up for everyone else.
Yeah, that's basically what he said. Yeah.
And yeah, I thought that was a good episode. I really do. Reflecting back on it, I thought we had some really good kind of like pushback at it, but also some points where we agreed with it.
Yeah, I thought it was a great episode, but I'm shocked that it was so highly downloaded. Maybe the name search was, I don't know, if it was in the
right.
title. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it might have been a little clickbaity in that.
Yeah, really.
Well, maybe some folks had the impression that David Einhorn was on that show, on that episode, which wasn't our intent, but I think, anytime you put a name like that in the title, some folks will assume that. So,
But we already established they listen to us, not our guests.
Yeah, exactly. We've had some really good high profile guests, and that where it was clear that it was an interview, and those download numbers didn't spike.
Number two was a fairly recent one, and I think it was phenomenal, on Buffett and how inflation swindles the equity investor.
Oh, interesting. That's a good one
Yep.
because that's very topical and I think very important. And even though it's topical and timely, it's also ageless because there's always some level of inflation happening, whether you like to believe it or not.
That really stands out with that one, ageless. The fact that there's a shelf life to that particular episode. I know it's this week in intelligent investing, but the ones that you could absolutely call ageless, I'd expect to have greater duration to them.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
then number three was commercial real estate and the future of offices.
Really?
That one surprised me the most out of
Yeah.
all three.
Especially because I certainly don't know what the future of commercial office space. I mean, it's a super important question in a lot of ways, but I don't know. It's not, interesting. I'm very
Yeah. Do you have any favorites that stand out for yourself?
Yeah, frankly, I liked all the interviews we did. They were my favorites. Like I loved our weekly conversation. And like you said, Elliot, I loved our conversations that were kind of the pre conversations that weren't recorded where we talked about what we were going to talk about because, like I've said a million times, like I always wanted to avoid by a mile getting anywhere near giving investment advice on the podcast because I didn't want to be wrong and have it cost people money. I don't like sharing ideas like that. It's just not my thing. And so, but with you guys, where I know more of the context and I know how you conduct your own operations, we can kind of talk more freely. And that was by far the best part. And then when we could carry that over into a conversation on the podcast, those were fantastic. But yeah, as I look back to some of the things that stood out to me the most, that was just kind of good, normal, ongoing conversation. And the interviews we did with Roger Lowenstein was one that stood out that to me that I loved that conversation. I thought it was really cool. I'd always wanted to talk to him about some of that kind of stuff, and I thought that was great. But the numbers were not the download numbers anyway wouldn't share that opinion.
Yeah, the William Green one was our most downloaded of the interviews, which I
Is that
thought
right?
was, yeah,
Really? Huh.
that was fantastic.
Well, that was a great conversation. Yeah, but I'm surprised he would have been the highest downloaded one.
I must say, you are an excellent interviewer, and I thought your interview with Mobson at Latticework was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Uh,
By the way, John, is that available anywhere else? It's on the website, right?
it's on the website.
Yeah, people should check all of those out. I thought all the interviews
Yeah.
at Lattice Work were great. So if anyone missed that and has access to the website, they should definitely go visit that.
Yeah. Yeah, and before Elliot kind of talks a little bit about the plan going forward, I just want to echo what both of you said. It's been a real pleasure and delight to do this as a trio. I mean, I feel honored being included in this trio because I'm mostly a switchboard operator here and I chime in a little bit here and there, but it's really the two of you guys that have carried the show. And I think Phil, you have really kind of come into your own. That's been my impression with over the years with the podcast, and we're definitely going to miss you. I do hope you're going to come back and join us as a guest
Oh, for sure.
when your schedule allows. I know you're going to be super busy going forward.
No, we should just keep the same WhatsApp chat going, which has also been a really fun way to communicate. And you guys, if you have a topic coming up or a guest, if you're going to do more interviews or whatever, and the timing works, I'll jump on and that'll be great. But I didn't want to be that guy who's constantly rescheduling every week because it's just going to get tougher and tougher. And I feel like I'd kind of stretched myself too thin in a lot of ways. So as I was taking this kind of pause to review priorities and how I was going to do things, I just felt like, all right, 3.5 years, it's been a really good run. I should probably try to look at these other things. So that's really all it was. I definitely want to keep going with you guys as much as we can. It's just not going to be every week or every other week or whatever.
Hey, we'll all look forward to it. And John, Phil and I bring the topics, but you bring the wisdom, so it's
Yeah,
it's awesome.
that's what I was gonna say too, John. Is like this wouldn't happen without you. And the comment I get most from people when they find out about the podcast is they listen to a few and they go, "Wow, what's John really like? I wish he'd talk more."
Uh-huh.
Well, gotta
Yeah, you
keep the
like,
mystery.
yeah, I was gonna say you like creating the aura of mystery and intrigue, I think.
I don't know
Amen
if
to that.
I don't know if I like it, but that's just kind of how it happens.
Yeah, and I mean, this is really one of the really most fun times of my week. And I think getting to spend it with you both, it's just, pretty unique. I'll miss it. John and I will keep going though. So just want everyone to know that we do have a plan. We'll be forward with more of what's next sometime soon. And this week in intelligent investing will indeed be going on.
Good.
Very similar with the topics and Phil coming in when he can. And, I think a lot's happened topically since our last podcast that covered some of that ground. And I think there should be some really interesting material going forward. I'd always felt these little pauses that we had were refreshing and helped avoid kind of as we'd go farther into a season, end up kind of beating the same dead horse sometimes. So we get, to start anew and kind of have some interesting ground to cover.
Yeah, and we have some really loyal listeners, and so we didn't just want to stop now. Also, Elliot and I have had tons of fun, and we will continue to enjoy doing this. I also think we're gonna find ways to keep the podcast interesting and relevant. Obviously, hoping to convince Phil to come on whenever he can. And yeah, just want to, keep sharing our thoughts and, whatever we unearth in this world of value-oriented investing, which has become certainly a niche in the investment world, but a niche with a lot of super smart people who happen to be our listeners. And so I'm excited to, you know, keep going and keep making it better and better.
There's definitely been a bunch of things in the last couple of weeks where I'm like, man, that would make a perfect podcast episode. And I had to stop myself. So I'm like, oh, I don't even have time to dig into this right now. But the world is never short of interesting things for you guys to discuss. So that's the good news, right?
Hey, we talked about how it's getting crazier all the time. So
Yeah, I
as
feel like
far as podcast,
we're gonna have a lot more to talk about in the coming, you know, months and years, for better or worse.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
And I
and
want to
I
make a goal too. I want to get over. Elliot, you were there, right? Weren't you in Zurich last week or last month?
Farther than Zurich, we were in the mountains. It was fantastic.
Yeah, you went.
Amazing
Yeah,
week.
that's what I mean. I'd love to get up there. I've never been to that. I haven't been to the Zurich project in 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's another way where I can just hopefully carve out the time and make it more of a dedicated trip, and we could record something there if it works for all of us.
for sure. Well, I'd love to have you, Phil. Elliot is a regular in the mountains at least. So we'll make it happen.
Great.
All right, terrific. Well, this has been good, I think, to provide some context to our listeners, and we will be back in due course with a new episode and new plans for moving this forward. Until then, goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much, Phil and Elliot. Talk to you later.